What is your scariest true story? Serious. True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer and my mom had a window open her room, which was directly behind the bed, above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3/4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the door frame and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor and it was maybe a 3-foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry. Only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night, with a deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up her water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. Edit. Just to clarify, our apartment was on the ground level, so my mother didn't hurl me into potential paralysis, just a 3-foot drop to grass. Happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago while we were still dating. Her husband had just passed away about a year previously, but she'd been going down to the library and volunteering, exercise and socialization. This was in the winter, so her walk back was while it was getting dark. The library closed at 5 and then there was some extra stuff to do before everyone actually left, and on this particular night she turned down a ride home from another volunteer because, damn it, she needed to stay in shape. The house is about a mile away through some lightly wooded area in South Texas, and as she's about halfway home she notices someone behind her. He's walking the same direction and gaining on her, which in itself isn't all that particular. She's old and thus not particularly fast, but in this case he seems vaguely sinister. They keep walking. Pretty soon he's right behind her. Then he falls into pace, just staying behind her. Now she knows that something's up. But she's almost home. She can see the top of her driveway coming up, and she leaves her lights on so it'll look like someone's home when she's walking in. She just needs to make it another 150 yards. Then 100. All that time, she said he was so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. Maybe 50 yards, it happens, strong head on her shoulder. Okay bitch, don't turn around and hand over your purse or I'll king cutcha. She stops for a second, then takes one big step forward, turns and hoots the guy in the neck with the .38 she kept in her purse. Hey, it's Texas. The guy spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed last year. Up to the end, she lamented that she'd pulled the trigger too soon. My late husband would have been embarrassed to know I missed. I was sitting in my room, after getting out of work, on the second floor. Little bro is downstairs watching TV, the dog is in the hallway outside my door sleeping. All of a sudden dog starts making all kinds of racket, jumping round, barking, clacking nails, howling. I go to get up to see what's up and I hear "Oh, that's a good girl" in a male voice. It didn't sound like little bro, so I go, "Oh, you're home early," thinking it is my dad's friend / our roomie as I open the door. Soon as I'm out there is no one at all but the dog wagging her tail staring at the empty end of the hallway. Little bro comes upstairs to yell at me for getting his dog riled up, said he heard the same voice thinking it was me or a roommate. We did a once-over of the house with my butterfly knife and his BB gun and there was nobody. Still gives me the spooks to this day. I posted this last night in a similar AskReddit thread. A few years ago, I was home alone at night time. I was watching TV in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Whenever I hear the doorbell ring, especially when I'm home alone, I am cautious to answer it. I walk up to the peephole without turning on the porch light, so they don't know if anyone is actually home or not, and look through. It's really dark but I can see a small figure, more like black blob, eyed kid's definite shape and had to be around 3 to 4 feet, doing like a dancing motion. dipping down and oscillating its arms outward. Think of a person moving their arms like wings gracefully. It was dark outside, but this figure was more opaque, so I could see this going on. After a few seconds I stopped looking through the peephole because it was too freaky to look at. I regained some courage and looked back through, and whatever it was gone. To this day I still don't know what that was, and I get freaked out thinking about it. My ex-wife had several weird experiences. I'll just relate this one. I'm at work one day when she calls me out of the blue. We were still married at the time. She usually did not call me during the day because she worked the night shift. She tells me to call my friend Danny and make sure he and his family are okay. When I ask why, she tells me that she had a dream but can't remember it, but that I should call Danny and make sure he's okay. So I call Danny and check in with him. I tell him about my wife's dream. He's mildly amused but tells me that he and his family are fine and to thank my wife for her concern. I call her back and let her know all is well. She's very dubious when she hears the news. I found out later that within half an hour of my phone call to Danny, he got another call from his uncle in Florida to tell him that Danny's son had hanged himself. There's an abandoned house next to mine. The previous owner moved out to California 25 years prior and never sold it. I got a flashlight, gloves, and pushed the window open and went inside, starting with the basement. In the basement was a grand piano, still plays, but very much out of tune, old World War II stuff, what seemed to be a signed Elvis poster, some other really cool shit no one should ever leave behind. There's basically a whole story in that basement, including a broken wedding picture frame and instruments everywhere. On the main floor was an unmade bed, molded food still in the fridge, and on the stovetop, half-empty beers turned solid, lights that still hadn't been turned off. Then I started walking upstairs when I heard crying from one of the side rooms. That's when I freaked the duck out and haven't been there since. Alrighty. This is the late 80s/early 90s, I was around 6 to 7 years old. I am at home with my sister who was 14 to 15 at the time. We grew up in a small Texas town, everyone knows everybody. We are home alone this particular night, and my folks let my sister babysit me frequently. We always got along due to our age gap. Anyway, it is about 8 p.m. in the winter, deserts get pretty damn cold, so it is dark and we are in the common room since that is where the TV was. Watching 60 Minutes or 48 Hours or Hard Copy or some shit, those 1-hour news pieces on CBS that chronicle large crimes in depth, trafficking, murders, kidnappings and the like. Basically a gritty Lifetime special. This one was a typical story. Guy next door that was quiet went on a rampage in his next door neighbor's house, mutilating them and kidnapping their young daughter. Well, the thing about our house common room is the door leading to the backyard was a large glass door and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. Nothing but blackness beyond it unless you have the back light on. We did not. The front door is on the other side of the room with a small entryway. This is a solid door, so you cannot see what is beyond it, with a glass storm door on the outside of it. About 45 minutes into the show, they are talking about the ongoing manhunt for this crazy guy, and bam bam bam, front door bangs like crazy. We jumped the duck up and screamed like banshees. Dead silence now. The only lights on in the house are the kitchen down the hall from the common room we were in and the light from the TV. We start thinking something on the porch. We had some planters and a rocking chair out there, had simply blown against the door. This was West Texas, crazy strong winds out that way. Well, a minute or two of silence and us holding each other post-adrenaline overdose passes. Just when we are about to declare everything is safe, we hear the storm door on the outside of our front door close. Duck. Someone had to have opened that door to be able to bang on the front door like that. Shit. We are both frozen in the middle of the room on the floor where we had been watching TV. My sister crawls over to the TV and turns it off. It was an old TV, so you had to turn that metal dial to switch it off, which it does with a mildly loud thunk. Now it is just us in a room dimly lit by the kitchen light down the hall. I do not remember how much time passed with my frozen and my sister still crouched by the now off TV, but we kept making eye contact then looking at the front door. I remember this part vividly. I am on my knees sitting on my feet and I turn around to look at the back wall of windows and glass door. We hear and I see the back door knob turn. It was locked on the knob but not dead bolted. It rattles slightly as if someone is gently trying the handle. Neither of us make a sound, just held breath. Then bam 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 loud as all hell, someone is trying to force the door open, just jerking it back and forth. The whole wall of windows is vibrating violently and I can see with each jerk of the door how my slight reflection gets fuzzy, then clear, then fuzzy. My sister flips her shit and screams bloody murder. I am still frozen on the floor. She gets up and basically drags me into her bedroom, slams the door, throws her mattress and anything she can in front of her door. Thankfully she had remembered the phone, one of those ungodly heavy beige plastic long metal antenna portable phones. We still had to direct dial the sheriff there, and in her panic didn't remember the number. She just hit redial on the phone. It was one of her friends, and she tells them in broken gasps that someone is trying to get into our house and needs to get there right king now. The profanity sticks out here more than anything else. Who knows, young brain. I am curled up on the floor and cannot stop shaking. We don't hear anything else until we see the headlights of my sister's friend and her parents driving up to the house. We never did find out who was at the door or why. There were no signs of anything happening but a couple of scuff marks on the bottom of the back door that we could not remember if they were there beforehand or not. Nothing like that has happened to me or her since, but for damn sure we never forget to lock a door after that. When I was 10 or so, I went with my dad to go ice fishing, and it had just snowed the night before, so you couldn't see the ice. On our way out to the ice house, I ended up falling straight through an unmarked hole that had a very thin layer of ice covering it. The scariest part of this was instantly shutting down and sinking because of the cold. I could look up and see where I had fallen through but couldn't swim back up to it. After a few seconds I finally willed myself up and to the edge, where my dad pulled me the rest of the way out. TLDR, cover your ice holes when you're done with them. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating a guy she met on a dating site. That part is fine. I had recently started dating the woman who would later become my wife, and we had met online. I'll just refer to her as my wife for this story. Anyway, my wife and I never really liked this guy. We didn't think he was mean or anything like that, just a little creepy. He was quiet, he kept his eyes closed a lot, and occasionally said odd things like offering my wife a chocolate and then popping one in his mouth, closing his eyes, and moaning as he let it melt in his mouth. One time my wife and I were visiting my mom, but she got called into work, so we waited at her house. Her boyfriend was over, but he spent the entire several hours just hanging out in her bedroom with the door closed. Just before Christmas, my mom and this guy started having some difficulties. My wife and I were visiting her for the holidays, and she dropped all of her problems on us, and we listened carefully and told her our opinions and suggested that she would be better off without him. She already had her mind made up, though, and decided to break up with him. On Christmas Eve, we spent the night at my mom's and got up early on Christmas morning to visit my dad at his house. We didn't plan to spend the night at my dad's, but we got snowed in, which was actually a nice Christmas surprise. The next day we left as soon as we could get through the snow, and my wife suggested that we stop by my mom's house on the way so that we could see if she was okay. My wife just had a really bad feeling about my mom's now ex-boyfriend. My mom's car was in the driveway, but that doesn't mean much because she lives close enough to work that she often walks, and it hadn't snowed in her town. She also never locks her door, which drives me crazy, so we let ourselves in. That's when we see blood oozing out of the refrigerator's water dispenser. It had filled up the spill container and was leaking onto the floor and had made a puddle. My wife screamed and I freaked out. I fully expected to see my mom's head in the freezer. I nervously opened the freezer to find a bag of frozen cherries that had been opened, crammed into the freezer so that it fell onto the ice dispenser, and melted. TLDR, thought my mom was decapitated by her creepy ex-boyfriend. Nothing paranormal, but very scary at the time. My oldest brother, now deceased, was almost a human killing machine. He could spot game other people couldn't see. One day, I was out hunting with him and he used my shoulder as a rest and killed a crow I couldn't even see until it exploded. I do not condone killing crows. He rarely missed. One day we were out fox hunting in the winter. Fox are very smart animals, and, in the winter, you sometimes come across them sleeping on top of hills, probably because the sunshine keeps them warm. We are walking along and bro says stop, down, in a whisper. About 300 yards away is a fox, all curled up on the top of a hill. So, he lies down and prepares to make his shot. Just after he flipped the safety off, a second before pulling the trigger, the fox basically does a 180 on the snow, still as a ball. It turned out the fox was a fox hat. Some asshole wearing a fox hat decided to drive a snowmobile on somebody else's property, and my brother would have taken his head off if he hadn't moved. I rode out in front of a car on my bike when I was 11 and the car honked really loud at me. I stupidly flipped the car off and they came to a screeching halt. A huge guy stepped out and went to open his trunk. His girlfriend got out of the passenger's side crying and screaming, begging him not to open the trunk. I was frozen in fear. He got back in the car and sped off. I have no idea what was in the trunk. Hopefully not a fully automatic machine gun on a turret. I have some stories that scare the heck out of me, but I'm not sure how you all will react because it's not your messed up brain. Shortly after graduating from high school, I woke up one morning and found my father dead in our living room. I tried giving CPR, but he was already dead by the time I came out. I suffered PTSD from this event and would regularly have nightmares where I would be walking to the living room and I would realize what I was about to see and I would start screaming before I got there, and then I would wake up screaming. This lasted about a year where I was not a functioning human being. I would stay awake for days to not experience the dream over again. Then one day I had a mental break in the middle of the day. According to my girlfriend, who is now my wife, said I tensed up like I was having a seizure for about an hour straight. In my mind I had to keep living out that morning over and over, but I would stop myself before I went into the living room with a primal scream, which my wife said I would do in real life as well, until I finally let myself go into the living room and see my father's dead body. After I came out of it I did not have the nightmares anymore. Flash forward to 2005, I joined the army and I'm in Iraq. I was leading a convoy and we had intel that terrorists were sending children out in front of convoys to get them to stop and ambush them. As I'm driving, a kid runs out about 300 meters in front of my vehicle and I froze. We had orders to run over anyone in our way and I was dreading having to make this decision. My truck chief is screaming at me to floor it, so I do, and the kid dodges out of the way at the last second. When we get to the next fob I go to get some sleep, but I'm disturbed about the moral choices I had made that day. As I fall asleep I have a nightmare that I am driving again and the kid jumps out in front of me. This time I run him over but then stop feeling the horror of what I did. I go to check the body and as I go around to the back of the truck I get that same dread I used to. Somehow in my brain I remember my old nightmares and assure myself it's not the same. As I get around the truck I see my father's dead body and I go straight into my primal screaming again, only to wake up screaming and running. I mean I am at a full sprint as I wake up and in a part of the fob I don't recognize. I thankfully haven't suffered from these nightmares anymore, but I'm in constant fear of my own screwed up mind. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.